So Blackmagic has been in the camera space for a very long time. Obviously, I have been a lover of the Blackmagic camera since I got the original Pocket Cinema camera, I think in 2016, and I really did love it. And obviously, since then I've upgraded to the URSA. I just bought a 6K recently. Although these cameras are incredible, there of course is always ways to grow, and things like the 12K have been amazing. The 6K Pro now is really awesome, but there are a couple things that I want to see in the future, and in the future of their cameras, that I think would take it to the next level. So this is kind of a wish list and what I think Blackmagic is going to be doing in the future to really take over the camera market. Now I gotta say, these aren't going to be ridiculous things like, I wish they had 12K, this and that and that. I'm gonna try to keep this as basic as I possibly can to what really I think Blackmagic is aiming towards. Because obviously they are coming after camera companies like ARRI or obviously Red, and they've taken quite a bit of their clientele, but I think there's a few things left on the table that is going to really set them aside. Of course, one of the first things is full frame. But I'm actually less concerned about full frame, and I have a feeling that Blackmagic is going to go for the bigger, and that is large format. And the reason why I think that is because large format cameras are really the true highest end cinema standard you can get to. You know, when it comes to the biggest blockbuster movies, they're sometimes shot on IMAX, which is a type large format, or on the Alexa LF or the Alexa Mini LF. And that is obviously where Alexa is moving towards, and the ARRI camera company in general. So I think that Blackmagic is going to follow suit. Obviously, there isn't a ton of cameras in that market, and although they haven't stepped into the full frame market, I really believe that jumping to that large format is going to push them much further and get them on bigger film sets and kind of replace the ARRI Alexa. Again, I'm not saying replace, they're not going to replace the Alexas, but at least from a competitive standpoint, they will be a competitor. The second thing is to actually make a smaller form factor. Now the 6K Pro has kind of changed this because the 6K Pro is a really incredible camera for the smaller form factor, but I'd like to see something between the 6K Pro and the URSA Mini Pro G2, because the URSA Mini Pro G2's camera body and functionality is much better, and obviously the sensor is much better. Even though the 6K Pro is a 6K sensor and is great, I'd like to see the form factor of the 6K Pro maybe a little more boxish, kind of like a Red or like one of the Z cams, with the internals of the URSA Mini Pro G2 or something upgraded on that. Obviously this LF sensor would be incredible. So again, kind of targeting the Alexa Mini market, because I do think the URSAs are a little bit bigger, especially considering Sony with the FX series is making some really small cameras, and obviously Red with the Komodo has made a really small camera. So I do think in the future it would be really cool to see Blackmagic push that limit and sort of make their cameras smaller and smaller without getting rid of the cinema body and them being a nice, hefty type of cube. Because I do think when they get too small, it becomes just kind of an annoyance. So I kind of want to find a middle ground, something a little bit smaller than the URSA and a little bit bigger than the 6K Pro. The third thing is better ISO performance. So right now the 6K Pro does really well at low light, but I still think it doesn't come close to the things that like Canon and Red are doing, where Red and Canon cameras you can really push to 6400 and even higher with being really clean images. Now I'm not saying Blackmagic has to jump all the way up to 6400 ISO or even beyond that. I think honestly a very usable, and when I say usable I mean like clean usable, 3200 would be incredible. If they can hit a 3200 on the URSA series of cameras that is just like incredibly clean, like it looks like 400 ISO, that to me is a massive step forward. Now, because I think anything over 3200 is kind of overkill for a cinema camera, but I do think having it a little bit higher would help someone like me who uses the URSA in a wedding format or in maybe some lower light circumstances where you don't have the budget for a lot of lighting, or maybe you stylistically want it to be a little less lit. So I do think some higher and better ISO performance would go a long way. Again, I'm not saying it needs to be way up there with some of the Canon or Red cameras, but I do think if 3200 was clean, I would be more than happy. The fourth thing is actually something that's just kind of come into my view recently, is something like the OLPF and an interchangeable OLPF. Basically, an OLPF sits in front of your sensor and usually does some type of sensor correction. So it helps with like moire or maybe some IR cut, or possibly fixing like a plus green or magenta. And there are some other third-party companies like Raw Light that actually makes an OLPF I'm gonna be getting my hands on soon to check with the 6K camera. But I'd love to see this sort of built into the URSA ecosystem, where it just comes with some interchangeable ones, kind of like like what Red does for their camera sensors. I think that that would be a really cool and interesting way to sort of optimize your camera already. Maybe already with the URSA add an IR cut or some type of moire or demore. And again, Raw Light has these, but if Blackmagic offered them, I think it'd be that much better of a just like, you know, streamlined system, and it's already pre-installed, or maybe an easier way of switching it in and out. That way you're not kind of going through a third party. But again, I haven't seen the Raw Lights in person. I haven't used it, but I am gonna be checking that out. So if you wanna check that out later, be sure to subscribe and get the notification bell for that one coming soon. Lastly, what I'd love to see on this type of future camera is no Blackmagic Crop. I love Blackmagic Raw. I think it's like the best codec to use. I honestly, like, it blows my mind the quality versus the file sizes and what you can do, and obviously having a raw clip is so nice. The biggest issue with the URSA and really any of the Blackmagic cameras, but in particular the URSA Mini Pro G2, is its crop in on the sensor when you're using a lower resolution. Now I know the 12K has fixed a lot of this because of course the 12K, the way it's downsampled, but I'd love to see this in the future camera with something that's a large format or maybe a full frame where you don't have to actually crop it on the sensor, because to me that's a real killer when it comes to using Blackmagic Raw, where I don't really want to be shooting maybe 4.6K, maybe I only need to be shooting 1080, but if I use Blackmagic Raw I'm going to crop way in on the sensor and it's going to cause just a ton of problems. So I'd really love to see some type of downscaling coming to all of the cameras, not just the 12K. And of course something, if it was large format or full format, or if it was large format or full frame, that would be awesome. So that is it. There's a lot of wishful thinking on my end, but I do think that this is the direction that Blackmagic is moving in. I don't think they're looking to make the real trendy cameras or something that's going to be just kind of fun or, you know, like gimmicky. I do think these are the type of, I don't want to say simple because they're not simple fixes, but the sort of basic types of things that really high-end people are looking for in a high-end video workflow. And if we can see these on a large format sensor or on a full frame sensor in the URSA with a smaller body, having like the OLPF and better ISO performance and no crop on the Blackmagic Raw, I mean, that turns the, if you know this was a future URSA camera, into pretty much the best, if not, you know, one of the best cameras that you could buy on the market, and especially because Blackmagic is so competitive with price. So anyway guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe as always, and I'll catch you guys later. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, consider subscribing. We post gear reviews, tutorials, behind the scenes, and a lot more on a consistent basis. And of course, be sure to hit the notification bell so you're always notified and the first to watch. So, go subscribe.